The boy was playing hide-and-seek with his friends, but even 100 police officers couldn't find him.
Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Every autumn afternoon, the neighborhood children would gather at Elmwood Park, an essential meeting spot for their childhood games. Today, like any other afternoon, a group of 8 children aged 7 to 10 were excitedly playing hide-and-seek. Their clear laughter echoed across the wide lawn, blending with the rustling wind in the tall trees. Martin, an agile and clever 8-year-old, was considered the hide-and-seek champion, having never once been found while hiding. "I'm going to count to 30. Anyone who doesn't hide in time is a slowpoke," shouted Claudia, a 9-year-old girl, her face pressed against the trunk of an old chestnut tree in the middle of the park. "Don't count too fast." Joseph, Martin's best friend, yelled as he ran behind a thick bush. Martin quietly slipped down a small path behind the playground. He knew a special hiding spot, a fallen dry bush about 50 meters away, next to a low stone wall near the park's fence. He snuck out toward it, crouched down, and crawled into the space between the branches and leaves. "This hiding spot is going to drive Claudia crazy. She'll never find me," he thought, and giggled to himself. Claudia counted loudly, covering her eyes. 28, 29, 30. "Here I come." The whole group fell silent. The sound of footsteps rustling through dry leaves filled the air. Claudia shouted. "Joseph, I see your feet behind the bench." "Ack. That was too fast." Joseph stood up, disappointed. One by one, the others were found, Lucy behind the swing, Danny under the slide, the Thomas brothers in the path by the lily pond. Only Martin remained unfound. Where's Martin?" Claudia asked, panting from running and laughing. "He probably found some super secret spot again." Joseph guessed, glancing around. "Let's split up and search everywhere," Lucy suggested. The children fanned out across the park. They searched the bushes near the playground, the public restroom, the paths around the pond. They even knocked on the big trash bins. "Martin. Hey Martin. Come out. You win already," Claudia shouted, her voice growing slightly anxious. No response. After nearly 10 minutes of searching, Joseph frowned. "Maybe he went to the bathroom without telling us." "But I just checked, there's no one in there," Lucy shook her head. Claudia began to feel something wasn't right. She walked toward the fence where the path led out to the empty lot, calling non-stop. "Martin. Where are you? The game's over." A strong gust of wind blew past, sending fallen leaves swirling across the path. The sky had begun to glow orange-gold, signaling that sunset was near. The atmosphere grew eerily still. Claudia looked around, her stomach twisting in a knot. "This can't be happening," she whispered. Lucy walked up beside her and asked softly. "He still hasn't come out?" Claudia gave a small nod. The group of children now began to truly worry. Their playful laughter had turned into confused silence. Danny tugged at Joseph's sleeve. "What if he left the park and got lost?" "We have to tell an adult," Joseph said firmly. Just then, a voice called out from the park gate. "What are you kids playing, making all that noise?" It was Mr. Alexander, the elderly park keeper, around 70 years old, thin, wearing an old felt hat, and often seen reading a newspaper on the bench near the entrance. Claudia ran to him, speaking quickly. "Sir, our friend Martin is missing. He was hiding, and now we can't find him anywhere." Mr. Alexander frowned, glancing around. "You're saying your friend has gone missing?" "Yes, sir, since we started playing hide-and-seek. We've checked everywhere." Without another word, Mr. Alexander pulled a phone from his pocket. He wasn't used to cell phones, so it took him a few seconds to dial correctly. "Samuel. It's Alexander, over at Elmwood Park. A child's gone missing. Notify his parents right away and call the police to come check the area." As Mr. Alexander made the call, the children huddled together silently. Claudia clenched her fists, tears welling in her eyes. "I was just counting, like always. I didn't think he wouldn't come out," she sobbed. Lucy wrapped an arm around her shoulder, whispering comfort. "It's okay. Maybe Martin just went somewhere. Maybe he's coming back soon." But none of them believed that anymore. Less than 10 minutes later, Martin's mother, Laura, rushed into the park, her brown hair disheveled, face pale. She shouted when she saw the group of kids. "Where's Martin? Kids, where is my Martin?" We couldn't find him, Ms. Laura," Claudia choked out. Laura collapsed to the ground, covering her face with her hands. Joseph and Danny stood frozen, unable to meet her eyes. At that moment, a police car from the nearby station pulled up, red and blue lights flashing. A tall officer in his 40s with short black hair and a dark leather jacket stepped out. His name was Sergeant Harris. "I'm Sergeant Harris, local police." "Who was the last person to see the boy, Martin?" he called out. Claudia, trembling, stepped forward. "I'm Claudia. I was counting, and my friend was hiding. When I couldn't find him, everyone got worried." Harris jotted notes into his notebook, then turned to a fellow officer. "We need to secure this entire park area. Call for backup. Bring in the K-9 Unit 2. Laura remained seated on the ground, her eyes blank, her lips trembling. "No. Martin, my son, where are you?" Harris crouched beside her. "Ms. Laura, I promise we'll find your son. But I need you to stay calm and tell me what was Martin wearing today." "A sky blue jacket, dark jeans, and white sneakers," she responded mechanically. Sirens wailed again in the distance. More vehicles were arriving. Police officers began cordoning off the park, setting up barricades and establishing a command center in the small parking lot to the side. Claudia stood beside Joseph, staring at the blood-red sunset behind the trees. He couldn't have just disappeared. He couldn't have. But the sky kept darkening. And Martin still hadn't come back. Night had fallen. Pale yellow streetlights flickered on, casting a dim glow over the stone path leading into Elmwood Park. In the Silver Hill neighborhood, the mood had shifted from worry to a spreading sense of fear. Outside the park fence, residents began gathering. Mothers clutched their children tightly. Many whispered among themselves in shock. Inside the park, the search entered its third hour. Officers carried flashlights, and the K-9 unit was released to sniff around. "No strange footprints here, Sergeant," an officer reported. "Just lots of messy prints from the kids. Then check the vacant lot behind us, and every abandoned building and the public restroom too. Don't leave anything unchecked," Harris ordered firmly. Meanwhile, Laura still sat curled up under a tree, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Lucy, a longtime neighbor, draped a shawl over her shoulders. "Claudia said Martin hides really well. Maybe he just fell asleep somewhere, Laura." Laura only shook her head, her voice hoarse. "No. He would never wander off on his own. He knows I'd worry. He always listens to me." Claudia approached, eyes swollen and red, and said timidly, "I'm sorry. If I'd just counted slower. If I'd paid more attention." Laura didn't blame her. She gently pulled Claudia into a hug and held her tight. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. It's nobody's fault. We just need to find Martin." At that moment, Sergeant Harris spoke into his radio to his superior. "Yes, it's a serious situation. We need to increase manpower and deploy drones if available. We're not ruling out abduction." He then stepped onto a raised platform, looked over the area, and made a loud announcement. "We're conducting a full-scale search. Everyone not involved, please leave the park. If you're a parent of one of the kids here, please head home. Officers will come by to collect information." A few people objected, including Mr. Michael, a man in his 50s who ran the corner store. "We care about the boy too. We can't just sit back and wait." Harris replied curtly. "I understand, but crowds will only make the search harder. Please cooperate." The search continued throughout the night. By dawn, reinforcements from neighboring towns had arrived. A large truck parked at the end of the street, carrying search equipment and thermal cameras. "We're from Tacoma," introduced Lieutenant James Morgan. "We've brought dogs, cameras, and even mini drones." Harris shook his hand. "Thank you. We need to sweep the entire southern field and the abandoned buildings near the old factory. As fast as possible." The townspeople stayed awake all night. Flashlights blinked across the fields, and cries of "Martin" echoed from the lips of strangers. But all efforts were in vain. Not a trace. Not a sound in return. At dawn, exhaustion was written all over everyone's faces. Laura had been taken home to rest under the care of her cousin, Mrs. Teresa. But she kept begging to go out. "I have to look for him. I can't just sit here. Please," she pleaded. "Laura, you're exhausted," Teresa said gently. "The police are doing everything they can. Let them work." Meanwhile, at the Silver Hill police station, an emergency meeting had been called. On the whiteboard was a map of the area, with the already searched locations marked in red. "We're missing something," Harris said, arms crossed. "No trace, no dropped items, no witnesses. That's highly unusual. We could be dealing with a sophisticated abduction," Lieutenant Morgan observed. "I want to review traffic camera footage from the area, including images from last night's drone flights." A young officer, Ellen Ramirez, spoke up. "There were rumors last week about a strange man appearing near the park. He would stand at the end of the street, looking toward the playground. Some parents mentioned it." "Name? Description?" Harris asked quickly. "No one remembers exactly. Just that he wore a brown coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and always kept his distance." Morgan nodded. "We need to focus on this possibility. I'll request a composite sketch based on witness statements." At the same time, unrest was spreading through the neighborhood. People began whispering, and more blame was being thrown around. "I heard Martin used to play near the old factory. Maybe the kid got curious and got stuck somewhere. Or maybe, someone in this neighborhood knows something and isn't saying." These murmurs reached Claudia. She overheard her mother, Iris, speaking with a neighbor. "What if there's a stranger living around here that everyone assumes is normal? Like Mr. David, the guy who collects junk, he always looks at the kids weird." Claudia gasped. "Mom! Mr. David hasn't done anything wrong. He even gave me candy once." "Hush, Claudia," her mother scolded softly. "We don't really know who anyone is anymore in this neighborhood." The atmosphere in town began to shift. Every look became one of suspicion. Every stranger was scrutinized. People weren't just afraid because Martin was missing, they feared that someone they knew might be behind it. Back at the station, Harris turned to Morgan. "If this is a kidnapping, why no ransom demand? No signs of struggle? Kids panic easily, but wouldn't he have dropped something? Could also be impulsive, someone who lost control. Or, someone who was mentally prepared to do this," Morgan speculated. Meanwhile, Laura was summoned to identify several suspects. She sat across from 3 hastily printed photos: a homeless man named Edward Graham who had previously been arrested for harassing minors, a quiet man named Nicholas Daniels who lived near the park, and an unfamiliar face wearing a wide brown coat. Laura stared at each picture for a long time, then shook her head. I don't know. I've never seen any of them before. But this guy," she pointed to the one in the brown coat, "he looks like someone I saw last week while walking Martin to school." Harris marked the photo. "Thank you. This is our first solid lead." The next morning, a small helicopter flew overhead, scanning the wooded area behind the town. On the ground, the search teams continued combing through thick brush and old drainage pipes. Every corner was being searched, but Martin was still nowhere to be found. On a park bench near Elmwood Park, Claudia sat hugging her knees, staring into the distance. She wasn't crying anymore. She simply whispered, "Martin, where are you? We miss you so much. Please, just come back." There was no response. Only the cold wind blowing through the trees, and a deepening sense of despair that settled in every heart across Silverhill. By the second morning since Martin's disappearance, the town of Silverhill had become an entirely different place. Once peaceful streets were now filled with the sound of police sirens, the hurried footsteps of search teams, and the frantic eyes of its residents. From one end of town to the other, posters of Martin were everywhere, his chubby face, bright eyes, and gentle smile the face of an 8-year-old boy. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Vincent, from the Special Investigations Unit in Washington, had just arrived at the scene with his team of 8. A man who had solved multiple child abduction cases in the past, his weathered face and piercing gaze seemed capable of seeing through any suspect's soul. "I want every piece of data available, including records of any unfamiliar person spotted within a 3-kilometer radius of the park," Vincent ordered as he stepped out of the vehicle. "We're compiling that, but nothing solid yet. Some of the witness statements conflict, and the traffic cameras don't have line of sight on the playground area," Harris replied, sounding drained from 2 sleepless nights. "I need access to the abandoned buildings in the north, including the old paper mill. Also, compile a list of all individuals in this region accused of endangering minors over the last 10 years. "We've already started that, Colonel. One notable name is Matthew Adams. He was arrested in Spokane in 2012 for luring minors. His current whereabouts are unknown." Vincent nodded, his eyes scanning a detailed map. "I want to assign specialized search teams. Group A will handle residential zones, Group B will sweep all abandoned properties, and Group C will use drones to scan the forest behind the town. Activate all thermal imaging and magnetic scanning equipment." "We're low on manpower," Harris admitted quietly. "But I'll make it work." Inside the temporary command center at the town's cultural hall, tension hung thick in the air. Officers moved non-stop between printouts, reports, and files. Every piece of information was pinned onto a large whiteboard at the center of the room, clearly marked with 2 bold lines: "Martin Williams, age 8, missing since October 23. Laura was there too, sitting in a corner, eyes swollen. Mrs. Teresa never left her side, occasionally handing her water or resting a hand gently on her shoulder. But Laura said nothing. She just stared at the photo of her son on the wall. "Sis," Teresa whispered, "they're doing everything they can. We have to believe in them, okay?" Laura simply pressed her lips together and gave a slight nod, but her eyes didn't move. Outside, the search went on. A team of 50 officers, 20 local volunteers, and 4 search dogs split into units to cover every area. "Careful behind that pile of bricks. There might be a crawl space," one officer shouted. Among the volunteers was Alan Jenkins, 29, the PE teacher at Silverhill Elementary, where Martin was in 3rd grade. "Martin is such a good kid," he told Morgan as they searched an old warehouse near the bus terminal. "He's never gotten into fights or caused trouble like some other kids. I don't believe he ran away on his own." Morgan turned to him. "Did he ever mention anything unusual? See someone strange? Seem scared of anyone?" "No, at least not to me. But I do remember one time he came to class looking upset. When I asked, he just shook his head." "What day was that?" "About a week ago. Tuesday, I think." Morgan jotted it down, frowning. It wasn't much to go on, but every fragment mattered. Meanwhile, the drone team back at command was starting to receive signals. A large screen showed live aerial footage. Officer Isaac Lewis was monitoring it. "The camera is scanning the eastern forest area," he reported. Temperatures steady, nothing unusual except a few foxes. Shift the scan westward. There's an old wooden cabin marked on the old town map, Vincent instructed. Copy that. As modern tech worked tirelessly, the locals weren't standing still either. Many residents like Mrs. Caroline, the bakery owner, Mr. Julian, a retired taxi driver, and Rose, a nurse from the clinic, joined the search efforts. I can't think of anything more terrifying, Caroline said, her voice trembling. An 8-year-old disappearing without a trace in broad daylight. We need to check that old well, Julian suggested. There's one behind Esteban's place that barely anyone knows about. I'll notify Team C, Rose said, pulling out her phone. Police agreed to expand the search to even the most remote areas. Teams went door to door, questioning residents, checking unlikely places: attics, sheds, chicken coops, basements. No door was left unchecked. However, this expansion had a side effect: widespread fear. Children were no longer allowed outside. Schools temporarily closed. Every window in town was shut tight. And suspicion seeped into every conversation. I saw Mr. Damien wandering around the park late last night, a woman whispered to Harris. He said he was just out for a walk, but it was strange. We'll check it out, Harris responded shortly, trying to stay calm. Every accusation now could be a breakthrough or a delusion. Back at the command post, Laura suddenly jumped to her feet when she saw an officer carrying a child's sky blue jacket. That's my son's, she screamed. Harris rushed over. Are you sure? Where was it found? On the northern edge of the forest, nearly 2 kilometers from the park, the officer replied. No blood, no tears, but it's covered in mud. Laura's legs gave out beneath her as she collapsed back into the chair. Harris knelt beside her. At least this proves Martin was there. And he might still be alive. Lieutenant Colonel Vincent immediately stepped in to cut off speculation. We can't jump to conclusions. We need to analyze the soil, hair, fibers. Increase patrols in that area. Set up a night post. Harris turned to Morgan. Everyone's exhausted, including Laura. But we can't stop. Morgan nodded. And we won't. Not until that boy is back. That afternoon, the sky over Silver Hill turned gray, hinting at a coming storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance from the mountains. But no one left their post. On muddy streets, voices continued to call Martin's name. Claudia stood under her porch roof, eyes following the search crews in reflective jackets walking past. She gripped a drawing of Martin she had made herself and whispered like a prayer. Martin, where are you? I won't play hide-and-seek anymore. Just come back, please. The wind picked up. Posters began to flutter, some tearing loose and vanishing into the sky. But Martin had still not returned. On the 3rd day since Martin's disappearance, a heavy, weary gloom settled over all of Silver Hill. At the temporary command center, Harris leaned over the desk, hands braced against the map now marked nearly solid red. His eyes were bloodshot, whether from lack of sleep or self-directed fury, no one could tell. With every hour, the odds of saving that boy go down, Vincent said quietly, stepping beside him. We have to admit that, Harris. No, Harris shook his head. I don't believe Martin is dead. He's out there somewhere. And we just haven't looked in the right place yet. And what if he's been taken far outside the search zone? What if we're looking in the wrong direction? Vincent asked, unable to mask his fatigue. Harris answered, voice hard as steel. I'm not giving up. Meanwhile, Laura hadn't left the command post all night. Teresa had tried multiple times to get her sister to rest, but it was useless. I can't lie in bed while Martin is out there, Laura whispered, her lips turning pale. What if he's calling for me and no one hears? Laura, you need your strength. What if tomorrow, you're called to identify? Don't say that. Laura shouted, springing to her feet. Don't talk like that. Martin isn't dead. He's not dead. The room fell silent. A few officers bowed their heads. Teresa gripped her sister's hand tighter but said nothing more. Claudia, watching from a distance, stood quietly. She came to the command center every day, still carrying her rain-stained drawing of Martin's face. Beside her stood Joseph, Danny, and Lucy, Martin's close friends. I wish I had hidden with Martin that day, Claudia said softly. At least I could have screamed or stopped the person. You didn't know, Claudia, Danny said gently. No one thought something like this could happen. We were just playing hide and seek, Lucy murmured. Suddenly Joseph frowned. Do you guys remember that alley behind the old paper mill? Where there's that little wooden shack? Of course, Claudia nodded. Why? Martin once told me he liked that place because it felt like a secret maze. Maybe he hid there that day. No way. Lucy interrupted. That place is 3 kilometers from the park. But what if he went there alone? Claudia stood up suddenly. I have to tell the police. However, when Claudia shared the details, the search team explained that area had been thoroughly checked on the first day. We examined the shack and the storage area behind it, Morgan said gently. We also used scent dogs. If Martin had been there, they would have picked it up. Claudia lowered her head. I didn't want to leave anything out. Harris gently patted her head. You did the right thing, Claudia. Every idea matters. Rumors continued to spread across the town. An elderly woman named Mary claimed she saw a man wearing a brown hat near the forest on the afternoon Martin vanished. A group of teenagers said someone had tried to lure their younger sister just a week prior. A truck driver named Ryan insisted he saw an old white van parked near the park that same day but couldn't remember the license plate. Stories piled up, none verifiable, but enough to shroud the entire town in fear and suspicion. The police haven't done anything, Mr. Michael snapped at the cafe that morning. They searched my house twice. I've lived here for 40 years and they treat me like a criminal. Can't blame them, Rose said. When no one knows who the culprit is, everyone's a suspect. No, Caroline cut in. What's most terrifying is the idea that none of us did it. That it was someone from outside. Someone who came and went, and left nothing behind. No one responded. That thought was far more horrifying. That afternoon, as a drone completed its final sweep over a lone northern hill, heavy rain began pouring down. Water surged over the dirt paths, forcing search efforts to pause for several hours. Harris sat inside a vehicle, eyes closed. He had fought to keep himself from breaking, but today, hopelessness crept into every nerve. The voice on the radio pierced his thoughts. Sergeant, we've got an unusual signal from drone camera 3. There's a structure looks like a tent or makeshift shelter about 600 meters from yesterday's sweep zone. Sending images to the command post. Forward it to Lewis immediately. I want it confirmed, Harris said, snapping upright and grabbing his coat. On the large screen inside the command post, a grayish square appeared among dense trees. Not very clear, but enough to raise concern. Vincent nodded. Send Team B immediately. Use the northern shortcut, and proceed with caution. Laura, hearing the commotion, stood up abruptly. What is it? What did you find? We're not sure yet, Harris said, trying to sound calm. Just an area we haven't thoroughly searched. I'm going with you, Laura said firmly. No. You'll only put yourself in danger, Vincent snapped. I'm that boy's mother, she shouted. If there's anything there, I have to see it with my own eyes. Harris looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Morgan. Get the vehicle ready. She's coming with an escort. When the team arrived, rain was still falling. The tent turned out to be a crude wooden structure, assembled with rusted pipes and moldy tarp. Inside were piles of trash, torn fabric, rotting food containers, and human footprints, but no sign of Martin. Laura dropped to her knees, tears mixing with rainwater. It's not here." Harris rested a hand on her shoulder, eyes scanning the surroundings. "But at least we know someone stayed here. And that someone might have taken Martin." From inside the fabric, Morgan pulled out a small item, a blue hair clip. "Might belong to a child," he said. Laura froze. Her eyes locked on the tiny object in Morgan's hand. By the time they returned to the station, night had fallen. No one said much. Each person was lost in their own thoughts, from fragile hope to unspoken guilt, from physical fatigue to a deep-rooted fear. In a corner of the room, Claudia quietly drew a new picture. This time, it was Martin standing in the middle of the park, waving with a bright golden sun behind him. Joseph glanced at it and whispered, "I miss his laugh." "Me too," Claudia replied. "But now I'm scared I'll forget what it sounded like." The wind howled through the window cracks. And darkness swallowed Silverhill once again. Night fell over Silverhill, and no one slept. The afternoon storm had left the ground soggy and unstable, the sky pitch black with no stars. Inside the command post, Harris sat silently at the desk, one hand pressed to his forehead, the other holding a red marker, though he hadn't drawn a new line in hours. "You need rest," Morgan said, setting down a cup of coffee. "I can take over for a while." "No. I can't sleep," Harris answered softly, his voice like stone. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the boy's face." A strong wind rattled the window, sending loose reports fluttering. Morgan bent to gather them, catching a glimpse of Harris's half-written notes. Only one line stood out. "Still don't understand, if this was a kidnapping, why no ransom demand?" "I've been thinking about that too," Morgan said quietly. "This doesn't feel like a ransom case. Could be impulsive. Or, something else entirely." Harris didn't reply. He simply kept staring at Martin's photo on the board, the smiling face, the bright eyes that once sparkled like sunlight. At that same moment, Laura sat alone in the waiting room, her body curled on a cold plastic chair. Teresa had been sent home by the medics after a spike in her blood pressure from stress. The door opened. A woman entered wearing a thick beige coat, her curly black hair tied up high. Her name was Patricia Miller, a trauma psychologist brought in to support the victim's family. "Ms. Laura?" Patricia spoke softly. "I'm a crisis counselor. May I sit with you for a while?" Laura nodded, her eyes still staring into nothingness. "I don't want to talk," she said after a few seconds of silence. "I'm not here to make you talk. Just, if there's anything you need to share, I'll be here to listen." Laura clenched her trembling hands, her lips dry and cracked. "No one understands," she whispered. "No one understands this feeling. Every second that passes, I don't know if my child is still breathing. Still crying. Still calling out for me. You're not alone. I know words can't fix this, but everyone here is doing everything they can to bring Martin home." Laura let out a dry laugh. "I don't need anyone to fight anymore. I just need my son back. I just need to hold him once." Outside, the search teams kept going. Volunteers were now broken into pairs, each equipped with a flashlight and a radio. One group, led by Alan, was sweeping along a small riverbank near the old farm. "Be careful around here, there's a lot of thick brush," he warned his partner, a woman named Beatrice, also a teacher at Martin's school. "Do you think the worst might have already happened?" Beatrice asked in a whisper. "I don't allow myself to think that," Alan answered. "If we stop believing the boy is alive, we'll stop searching." Suddenly, Beatrice froze, pointing left. "Look over there." In the grass, they spotted a small, round red object. Alan bent down, brushed away the leaves, and found a small plastic ball, the kind often sold in toy stores. Martin brought one just like this to class once, Beatrice whispered. Alan radioed in. Team 3 to command. Possible object found. Requesting coordinates and support. 10 minutes later, a police team arrived and sealed off the area. However, analysis showed the ball had been there a long time, caked in old mud, with no signs of recent use. Another fragile hope faded. Back at the station, Harris received a call from city police. Sergeant, this is Lieutenant Oliver from Washington. A station worker at Wenatchee reported seeing a man with a child matching Martin's description on Tuesday. They were headed toward the interstate train line. Why are we hearing about this now? Harris snapped. He wasn't sure it was the missing boy. But after seeing his face on TV today, he called in. Harris took a deep breath. I need surveillance footage from that station. Every minute. Every frame. We're transmitting now. Minutes later, in the control room, the clips began rolling. Morgan, Lewis, and Vincent all watched closely. At exactly 3:24 p.m. that day, a camera captured a tall man in a beanie pulling along a small boy. But the footage was blurry, only their backs were visible. Looks similar, Morgan noted. But can't see the face clearly. Find another angle. I want their faces, Vincent ordered. Lewis typed furiously, scrolling through frame after frame. Finally, from camera 6 at gate B, the boy's face flickered into view for a moment. Laura was called in. Her eyes widened the second she saw it. It's Martin, that's him. That face, those eyes. I know my son. Harris clenched his fist. Finally. A lead. But the relief lasted only a few minutes. When investigators contacted the intercity train unit, the response landed like a punch to the chest. That train made 3 stops: Spokane, Springfield, and Lewiston. At Springfield, cameras clearly showed the child wasn't Martin. It was a different boy traveling with his father. Laura gasped, as if all the breath had been torn from her lungs. She collapsed into a chair, covering her head with her hands. It's not him, it's not my boy. Harris left the room without a word. He walked down the hallway to a fogged-up window and slammed his fist into the wall, leaving a smear of blood on his knuckle. Morgan appeared behind him. You can't destroy yourself. Martin needs you to stay sharp. That boy, he's in my head. I feel like I've failed him. No. We still have time. But only if you stay standing. Harris nodded faintly. A long pause followed, broken only by the sound of rain tapping outside. Late that night, the command post grew quiet. Most search groups had returned due to darkness. But Harris, Morgan, and a few others stayed up, reviewing every detail again. Laura sat in a corner, no longer crying, just holding Martin's old jacket tightly. Claudia was still there. She walked over to Laura, holding out a drawing. Ma'am. I think if Martin sees this picture, he'll know I'm still waiting. Laura took it, her lips trembling. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for never giving up. Outside, the rain had stopped. But inside everyone, the storm still raged. It was nearly dawn. The temporary command center remained lit. The pale fluorescent lights gave everything a cold, sterile look, like the emptiness each person carried inside. Sergeant Harris washed his face in the restroom, the freezing water cutting his skin like knives. He looked into the mirror and saw a gaunt face, patchy stubble, sunken red eyes. He felt like a ghost wandering through a maze with no way out. Exiting the bathroom, Harris found Morgan sitting with Leon in front of a monitor, rewinding drone footage from a low-altitude flight. What is it? He asked, voice hoarse. This clip shows a small shack hidden under dense forest cover, Morgan replied. It's outside the boundary of the old zoning maps. May have been missed. Anyone checked it? No. The spot's hard to reach. No vehicle access, you'd have to hike nearly 2 kilometers from Raven Creek Ranger Station. Harris didn't hesitate. Prep a team. I'm going. Morgan frowned. You've been awake for nearly 3 days. Let me go. No. If there's even the slightest chance. I need to be the one who sees it first. At 5 a.m., 4 men set out, Harris, Morgan, Leon, and a rescue worker named Evan Carter, an expert in wilderness navigation. They wore waterproof gear, carried high-powered flashlights, radios, and survival knives. The forest at dawn was dense with mist. Towering trees loomed over them like silent walls. Each step sank into mud, the snap of branches mixing with the sound of their labored breathing. How far now? Morgan panted. About 600 meters, Carter answered, checking his GPS. Harris said little. He walked steadily, eyes fixed on the old paper map Leon held. It seemed like every step forward took him deeper, not just into the forest but into his own soul. About 40 minutes later, they reached the site. In a low clearing stood a sagging wooden hut, walls covered in moss and vines. No windows. The front door was ajar, creaking in the wind like a weeping voice. Harris signaled them to halt. He drew his sidearm and gently pushed the door open. "Police," he called softly. "If anyone's in there, come out now." No response. Harris stepped inside. The hut was pitch dark. A mix of mildew and rotting animal stench filled the air. In one corner was a pile of torn fabric and empty food cans. In the middle, a tattered old mattress. But what froze all 4 men in place was a small blue backpack, exactly matching Laura's description of Martin's. Harris rushed forward, unzipping it. Inside were several soaked comic books, a roll of duct tape, and a child's handkerchief embroidered with the letter M. "It's his," Harris choked. "It's Martin's." "No doubt." Morgan pulled out his radio. "This is Team 1. Shack located. Evidence suggests Martin was here. Sending coordinates. Requesting immediate backup." Leon scanned the area and pointed to a small depression behind a wooden panel. "There are child-sized footprints here, fresh. Very fresh." "It could be Martin's footprint," Evan whispered. Harris suddenly froze, his face pale. Quiet. The group fell completely silent. A faint rustling sound came from behind the wooden wall. Harris signaled. Everyone drew their weapons and moved slowly toward the noise. He kicked in the thin panel. Behind it was only a small, dark hollow, empty. No one was there. But a small yellow towel was draped over the corner of a wooden beam. Harris knelt down and picked it up. There was a dried bloodstain on it. None of the 4 could speak a word. The news was immediately relayed to the command center. Vincent and the forensic team arrived 30 minutes later and secured the entire hut site. While the investigation proceeded, Laura was brought to the scene. When she saw the backpack and the towel, she screamed. "That's Martin's. That's the towel I embroidered for him on his birthday last year." Patricia Miller held Laura tightly as she nearly collapsed. "I told you. He's still alive. He was here. He was here." "Ms. Laura," Vincent said gently, "we're running DNA tests on the blood. We'll have results soon." "No need. I know it's my son's," she sobbed. In a nearby medical van, Harris sat in silence. Morgan placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're close. Very close. But who would do something like this to a child?" Harris whispered. No one had an answer. That afternoon, Silverhill was awash in rumors. "Someone saw a drifter hanging around the Raven Creek Ranger Station last week," an elderly woman said at the market. "I heard the police found children's blood in an abandoned hut," another replied. "It's some lunatic, I'm sure. Someone who used to be locked up and came back for revenge." Claudia heard it all. She sat on her front steps, clutching her sketchbook, her eyes blank. Lucy came and sat beside her. "You okay?" "No," Claudia shook her head softly. "I'm scared. Not of the bad guy. I'm scared we'll forget Martin, if no one finds him." "I won't forget," Lucy said, gripping her friend's hand. "I promise." As night fell, in the small room at the command post, Laura sat alone hugging Martin's backpack to her chest. Her eyes were dry, her tears long gone. Patricia entered with a cup of hot tea. "Ms. Laura, if you'd like, I can stay tonight." "No need," Laura replied, her voice as fragile as thread. "I've already lost so much. I don't want to lose faith too. No one has stopped. None of us will. I know. But I'm afraid that tomorrow, everyone will move on to the next case. An accident. A new headline. And my son will be forgotten." Patricia gripped her hand tightly. "Not while I'm still breathing." The night was eerily quiet. No sirens. No loudspeakers. Just the wind. And a sense that something was approaching. The sky hadn't fully lightened when the command post buzzed back to life. News of the abandoned hut, the backpack, the towel, and the blood had spread through Silverhill like wildfire. But instead of hope, it brought a heavier despair. In the investigation room, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent received the lab results. "DNA is a match," he told Harris, his voice heavy as stone. "The blood on the towel is Martin's." Harris nodded, unsurprised. But it felt like a punch to the heart. "It's a small amount. Could be from a scrape, or maybe someone hit him," Morgan added, trying to cling to a sliver of hope. "Not enough to confirm it's life-threatening. But enough to confirm the boy was there. And possibly injured," Vincent concluded coldly. At the same time, Laura sat on a bench in the hallway, her head buried in her hands. She looked up as Harris approached and sat beside her, his face pale. "It's Martin's blood, isn't it?" she asked hoarsely. He didn't answer. But his small nod cut through her like a blade. Laura didn't cry. Her tears had dried the night before. She just stared at the wall in front of her and whispered. Who could do something like this to a child? A child who just liked to draw, read comics, and play hide and seek. Harris gently took her hand. "We will find them. I swear." Outside, Claudia, Lucy, Joseph, and Danny stood around a lamppost, watching the wind tear the missing posters into shreds. Claudia pulled out a new drawing this time. It showed Martin standing in the middle of a forest, surrounded by outstretched hands, as if guiding him home. "I'm putting this one right here," Claudia said, climbing onto a bench to tape it up. "You think anyone will see it?" Lucy asked. "I don't know," Claudia whispered. "But I can't do anything else. All I know is how to draw. And wait." Joseph looked around, then quietly removed his hat and gripped it tightly in both hands. "I hate hide and seek. I hate myself for once being happy we couldn't find Martin." Danny placed a hand on his shoulder. No one knew this would happen. A strong gust of wind blew through, scattering yellow leaves. Rain was coming again. At the police station, a new lead arrived. A man named Eric Anderson, living alone on the eastern edge of town, had been reported for past inappropriate behavior with children. He was once a school security guard but had been fired after an undisclosed incident. "I need every file on Anderson," Harris ordered. "Give me his work history, any investigations, and his recent movements." Leon spoke up. "There are rumors he used to live near Elmwood Park. Around the time Martin disappeared." "We can't act on rumors alone," Morgan interjected. "We need to confirm his whereabouts over the last 72 hours. And we need to search his house," Harris added. "As soon as possible." The investigation team mobilized immediately. Anderson's house stood near the eastern forest edge, roofed with rusting tin and surrounded by a broken wooden fence. He wasn't home, but neighbors said they'd seen him out late at night, often hauling bags into the woods on a bicycle. "I saw him near the highway, close to the gas station," said a neighbor named Lola. "He always stared at kids, especially the ones walking alone." Police entered the house with a warrant. Inside was a disturbing scene: walls covered with clippings from children's magazines, scattered old toys on the floor, and a basic cell phone full of strange messages. Harris picked up a child's drawing pinned to the wall, a crude sketch of a boy and a secret house. "Not proof, but suspicious," Morgan said. "Way too suspicious," Harris snapped. "Track him down. Send his photo to every security checkpoint, traffic cam, bus stop, and train station." By noon, the weather took a sudden turn. Dark clouds gathered, thunder rolled overhead. But despite the downpour, dozens of residents continued searching the forest behind Anderson's house. Evan Carter, along with 2 officers, searched a narrow path leading to an old root cellar once used for farm tools abandoned for decades. "What's that smell?" asked an officer named Charles. Evan sniffed the air, frowning. "Something odd, kind of like decomposition, but faint." They approached the cellar. One metal door had a broken lock. Inside, it was pitch black. "Flashlights," Evan ordered. Beams of light cut through the darkness. There were piles of old blankets, empty food cans, and a strip of fabric tied around a steel pole in the center of the room. No one was there. There was no sound. But clearly, someone or something had been here. "Call forensics." "Call Harris," Evan said, gripping his flashlight tightly. When Harris arrived, the rain still hadn't stopped. Wearing a raincoat, he stepped into the cold cellar, his eyes scanning every corner. On the wall were several muddy handprints, small ones, clearly made by a child. Near the pile of blankets was a cookie wrapper, the same brand Laura often packed in Martin's backpack. Harris stood still, his palms clenched. "Martin was here," he said firmly. "And whoever took him, left before we got here," Morgan added softly. That evening, with the rain still falling, Laura quietly approached Harris inside the command post. "Any news?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. Harris met her gaze, then, for the first time, looked away. "There are signs Martin was held in an old cellar. But right now, it's empty." Laura said nothing. She sat down, trembling. Claudia and her friends stood by the doorway. The little girl stepped forward, holding out a small envelope to Harris. "I wrote a letter for Martin. If you find him, please give it to him." Harris accepted it. He opened it and read the short, clumsy handwriting. "Martin, we're still waiting. Wherever you are, please come back. I promise I'll never play hide-and-seek again." No one said a word. There was only the sound of rain tapping on the metal roof. And a silence, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to arrive or not arrive at all. At dawn on the 4th day, Silverhill was still soaked from a relentless night of rain. Inside the command center, everyone had grown used to living on fragile hope. But just as the sky began to brighten, a phone call from the neighboring Greenwood community shattered the long silence. "Hello, police. My name is Clara Foster. I live in Greenwood," a woman's trembling voice came through. I think I just saw the boy you're looking for." The duty officer shot up from his seat. "Please repeat that. Did you say you saw a child?" "Yes. A little boy, brown hair, skinny, dirty face. He knocked on my door and collapsed in my yard." 6 minutes later, 3 police cars and an ambulance raced toward Greenwood, less than 3 kilometers from Silverhill. Harris rode with the first response team, his face tight with tension. What he felt wasn't quite joy, nor fear, it was something closer to waiting, like his entire being was tuned to the answer fate was about to give. When they arrived, in front of house number 17, a boy lay wrapped in a large fleece blanket. His face was filthy, but he was breathing. Beside him, Clara held his hand tightly, as if afraid he might vanish. Harris jumped from the vehicle and knelt beside the child. "Martin? Is your name Martin? Can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered open. He blinked, his lips trembled, and he whispered in a hoarse voice. "Mom. Mommy." Harris spun around and shouted. "Get Laura here. Now." Clara, eyes wet with tears, said. I heard a knock. At first, I thought someone was joking. But then I heard a faint voice. When I opened the door, the boy collapsed. I was terrified. The medical team quickly assessed Martin's condition. He's exhausted, shows signs of dehydration and mild malnutrition, but no serious injuries. He needs fluids and should be taken to the hospital immediately. Harris exhaled deeply, both hands braced on his knees, as though the crushing weight of the past few days had finally been lifted from his chest. He's alive. He came back. At the county hospital, news spread instantly. Laura was rushed in by a police vehicle. When she stepped into the ER and saw her son lying on the bed, she screamed. "Martin." The boy opened his eyes and this time, he smiled weakly. "Mom." The entire room went still. Laura ran forward and pulled him into her arms, tears streaming freely. "I'm here now. Mommy's here, sweetheart. I'll never leave you again." Doctors tried to stop her to avoid disrupting treatment, but Harris signaled them to wait. Everyone understood at that moment, only a mother and her child needed to hold each other to believe they were still alive. News of Martin's return swept through Silverhill like a tidal wave of emotion. People flooded the streets, hugging and crying. The church bells rang 3 times, as if carrying a sacred message from the heavens. At Claudia's house, the moment she heard the news, she broke down sobbing. She rushed to the hospital with her mother, holding the last drawing she hadn't yet posted on a lamppost. In the waiting room, Claudia stood by the door, peeking in. When she saw Martin smiling however weakly, she couldn't hold back. "Martin." The boy looked up and smiled, voice still hoarse but clear. "Claudia. I'm sorry I let you hide too well." Martin grimaced slightly, but still smiled. "I won, didn't I?" The room erupted in laughter. 3 hours later, once Martin was stabilized, Harris, Morgan, and Vincent entered to hear his statement only after doctors confirmed he was strong enough to speak. Martin closed his eyes for a moment, then began in a steady voice. "That day, when I was hiding in the park, a man came up to me. He said he had a new game, better than hide and seek. I thought it was weird, but he was wearing a jacket like a security guard's." Harris and Vincent exchanged glances. "He took me out through the back of the park, said if I didn't scream, I'd get toys. After that, I don't remember much. I was locked in a very dark place. He gave me dry crackers and water, but didn't let me talk." "Did you see his face?" Harris asked softly. Martin nodded. "He had a long scar on his neck. And his right eye kept twitching." Morgan immediately opened his tablet and scrolled through the suspect list. When Eric Anderson's photo appeared, Harris showed it to Martin. "Is this the man?" Martin looked and nodded without hesitation. "That's him." Vincent growled. "I want a nationwide arrest order. Put him on Interpol's red notice list. He does not leave this country." 4 hours later, another hot lead came in. Anderson's old truck had been spotted at a gas station near Spokane, 120 kilometers from Silverhill. The attendant, having seen the wanted poster, called the police immediately. A pursuit was launched. Police set up roadblocks at every major route. By 10 p.m., the vehicle was located in the empty hills near Hickory Hill. Minutes later, Anderson was captured while trying to slip into an abandoned shack. He was handcuffed, his face smeared with mud, his voice trembling. I didn't do anything, it was just a game. Harris stepped forward, locking eyes with him. That boy nearly died because of your game. He lost his childhood in that darkness you called fun. Anderson let out a crazed laugh. He didn't die. You people should thank me. Before he could finish, Morgan punched him square in the jaw. But Harris pulled him back. No. He doesn't get an easy end. He'll face every minute behind bars and the whole country watching. The next morning, as sunlight bathed Silverhill for the first time in days, the laughter of children once again echoed through Elmwood Park. Claudia, Lucy, Joseph, Danny, and dozens of other kids held an outdoor art session. Along the playground wall, a mural began to form made of dozens of drawings. All under the same theme. Martin came home. Claudia sat next to Martin, sketching while whispering. You know what? We're going to build a small statue of you at the corner of the park. So that if anyone plays hide-and-seek, they'll always remember this story. Martin smiled. I just want to play soccer again. The whole group laughed. A cool breeze swept by, carrying golden leaves gently through the air. In that moment, Silverhill was no longer a town haunted by pain, it was a place beginning to heal. 3 days after Martin was rescued, Silverhill Hospital was still bustling with visitors. Not because the boy was severely injured, in fact, after receiving 4 fluids and a few hot meals, he had started to recover steadily. But townspeople kept coming to check on him, ask how he was doing, or simply see with their own eyes the miracle boy who survived. Claudia came the most. Almost every day, she brought a new drawing. I just finished this, she said, handing Martin a picture of a brightly lit house with the words "Welcome Home" written above. Martin smiled and held the drawing for a long time. I didn't think I'd ever be back. Claudia sat down beside his bed, her eyes gleaming with determination. From now on, I'll always hide with you. If anyone tries to hurt you, I'll scream loud enough for the whole town to hear. They both laughed. In that moment, it felt as if the terrible darkness of the past few days had never existed. Downstairs at the hospital, Harris and Morgan were working with the investigative team from Washington to finalize the case file on Eric Anderson. The man was currently being held at the Regional Detention Center, an institution known for its strict security and its tough stance on child abuse offenders. The charges are ready, Morgan reported. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, psychological trauma. With all this, he won't be seeing daylight before his hair turns gray. If he still has any hair left, Harris said coldly. He was reportedly attacked by other inmates his first night in, Morgan added quietly. Men like him don't live in peace behind bars. Harris made no comment. He simply nodded, then said in a voice that sounded like a closing line. Justice began the moment Martin was found. That afternoon, a small ceremony was held at Silverhill Square. In front of nearly 200 residents, Mayor Natalie Benson stepped onto a temporary wooden stage, holding a microphone, eyes glistening as she looked at the child sitting next to his mother in the front row. We have lived through some of the darkest days in this town's history, she began, her voice full of emotion. But from that pain, we've learned the most precious lesson, the power of human compassion. She turned toward Martin. You taught us all a lesson about resilience, about hope, and about believing in what's good. Applause thundered across the square. Laura couldn't hold back her tears as she hugged her son tightly. Afterward, everyone came together to create a massive mural nearly 10 meters long, spread out across the square. On it, children used paint to make handprints and signed their names underneath. In the center was an image of Martin, holding Claudia's hand, stepping out of a dark wooden shack into brilliant sunlight. Would you like to say something? The mayor asked. Martin stepped up to the stage, holding the microphone with both hands, speaking softly but clearly. Thank you, for not giving up on me. I was really scared. But I knew my mom, my friends, the police, they'd never stop looking. The square fell silent for a few seconds before erupting in cheers and tears. Claudia stood beside Martin and whispered, "From now on, you're going to be the main character in this town's fairy tale." Weeks later, life slowly returned to normal. But for those involved, especially Martin, that normal held an entirely new meaning. He returned to school, greeted warmly by classmates, teachers, and even the school security guard. Alan Jenkins, the PE teacher, handed him a brand new pair of soccer shoes. "Welcome back to the team, Martin. From now on, you're our starting striker." Martin hugged the shoes, his eyes shining. "Thank you, coach. I won't let you down." At recess, Claudia ran up holding a red rubber ball. "No more hide-and-seek today. Just soccer." "Deal," Martin nodded. "But if we ever play hide-and-seek again, make sure you hide next to me." "I won't let you disappear again," Claudia whispered. That evening, at Laura's house, a small gathering took place. Present were Harris, Morgan, Vincent, Teresa, and Clara Foster, the woman who opened her door to Martin at his most desperate moment. "I've never seen anything so miraculous," Clara said, eyes moist. "When that boy knocked on my door, I thought I was dreaming." Laura took her hand. "If it weren't for you, I might have lost my son forever. My family owes you a life." Harris lifted his cup of hot tea. "I used to think there were no miracles left in this world. But Martin proved me wrong." Morgan joked, "If this kid grows up to become a cop, I'm retiring early." Laughter filled the warm kitchen. Martin stood by the door, smiling. He didn't need to understand everything the adults were saying. He simply felt one thing: he was safe. And he was loved. That night, for the first time in weeks, Laura slept soundly. She dreamed of Martin running through a golden wheat field, holding a crayon drawing high above his head. In the picture, it was the two of them standing beneath the biggest sun in the world. When she woke, she turned to her side. Martin was still fast asleep, his face peaceful like that of a little angel. She leaned down and whispered, "I'll never let you be afraid again. I promise." Martin's story reminds us that love, unity, and faith can overcome even the darkest shadows. No matter how great the danger, when a community stands together and refuses to give up, miracles are still possible. Children must be protected with heart and with action. Those who harm the innocent must answer to justice. And above all, no one should ever be forgotten or left behind, because even the smallest light is enough to push back the longest night.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.